Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast. A few things I want to talk about today, and that is the world of digital identities. Open source identity management systems, password management, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication. There's so many big topics that impact every single person listening to this podcast, whether you're at home or whether you're in an office. So a company called Univention, they provide standardized identity management services for organizations from 5 people to 5 million. And I wanted to learn a little bit more about how companies can adopt leading-edge cybersecurity practices and turn IT from a hindrance into an asset, and also find out more if we are any closer to getting to that tech utopia of a passwordless future. So buckle up and hold on tight, because today I'm going to beam your ears all the way to Seattle, where Kevin Korte from Univention is waiting to share his story and talk about all things identity management and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Kevin. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Of course. My name is Kevin. I'm the president of Univention North America, which is a, by now mid-sized company working with open source identity management systems, which is that kind of annoying thing. It's the first thing in the office where you enter your password, your username, and hopefully everything pops up and you never have to enter that same stuff again.
Oh, yeah, that the utopia that we all dream of, right? But I'm looking forward to talking with you more about all of this and much more. But before we begin, I read that you're a German native. You moved to Seattle in 2013 to take over the role of president of Univention North America, where today you're responsible for the US team and help clients use open source identity management systems. But I've got to ask, just to set the scene, can you share your origin story and where your passion for technology came from when you were growing up in Germany all those years ago?
Rather simple. So I grew up relatively close to Bremen, which is on the north coast of Germany. And given you're in the UK, it's the only place in the world where they drink more black tea than the UK. And when I went to college, that was really the time where Facebook and this idea of social media came about, where you kind of pay with your data to get into somewhere, get a service, get into somewhere. And that brought me then on really the opposite path of saying, okay, I want to be in control of what I'm paying for. I want to be in control of what people do with my data. And really, by now, our data defines our lives. And that brought me to open source software and to Univention. And from there, kind of was a smooth sailing from project management to really opening the US branch, and then slowly and with lots of failures and mistakes growing it into what it's today.
What a great story. And of course, that path did lead you to Univention, as you said there. And I'm conscious we will have people listening, hearing about the company for the first time. So for those people, can you just offer a bit of an overview of the kind of problems that you're helping businesses solve?
I've mentioned the login in the very beginning.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the user says. Most users are like, IT is working, I don't want to deal with it. And believe me, if it's not working, it's a big deal. But on the other hand, you have the administrator who tries to keep everything running. And that's really for whom we make the product, because there's nothing worse than doing data entry, than creating user accounts in 5 different systems and misspelling the email address at least once, because that's what we do. We make mistakes, especially if we don't like what we're doing. So for these admins, we're there. We make it very easy to have one centralized system which enforces the policies and everything admins get from higher up, and keep that compliant, deal with compliance, and deal with provisioning all these services that a user uses in their day. And for the ones who want to go further, single sign-on, password-less stuff, so make really an impact on the cybersecurity of a company. But that you only can do if you have an integrated system. So first of all, we focus on integration and ease of use.
And a question I've got to ask you is, after more than a decade of working with digital identities, is there anything that still surprises you in your work? Because I would imagine you've seen it all over the years, but does the industry still have that element of surprise for you?
I think the big surprises whenever the big companies or the big cybersecurity organization, government agencies do surveys, then you come down with statistics like half of Americans reuse their banking password for work or for social media. And I'm like, we've talked about identities and of cybersecurity threats and all that for years. And yet we see it in government, we see it in the private sector, we see it with consumers. No one really takes it serious, and maybe we're really going to get rid of passwords, and no one has done so really yet.
Yeah, 100% with you on all of that. And I think it's something that frustrates anyone that spent any time in IT. And speaking of IT, what pains you most in IT? Are there any other frustrations that you could share with us?
Me personally, it's doing stuff twice.
Yeah.
Whether it's entering data twice or being now heading the really company, doing like reports, showing KPIs on a dashboard. So I'm really someone who is like onto automation. I don't want to touch another report ever again if a computer can write it for me.
So true. And I'm also curious, from an employee's point of view, there'll be many people that see IT as blockers. Some people see them as enablers, business enablers. I'll be much happier when everyone sees IT as business enablers, because that's what I see them as. But what advice would you give employees listening who might be frustrated with IT?
It's one of the bad things about IT that people only see it when it's broken.
Yeah.
And normally you only see it when it's really broken. These little frustrations, in my opinion, they just bubble under the surface. Then the thing which leads people to quiet quitting because they have to enter yet another password, or because they have to write the wonderful report every week. So my advice to anyone being an employee, if you notice that something is like, again, just say it, because most of the time, IT people don't know how the workflow in other departments is. They know, okay, that's the software people use, and that's what they do in kind of a high level, but how it really works, how someone in sales or someone in accounting gets numbers from one end to the other or gets the customer names over, that's something which is completely intransparent. And telling them that something's bothering you, telling IT that something's bothering us, and maybe for IT going out, looking at actually how people are working with the software, that can go a long way from making IT of the thing that's either there or itchy to something which really can help drive revenue and really optimize the company.
And a few moments ago, you were talking around some of the problems with passwords, especially users using the same password for their shopping, their banking and work accounts. And there is this whole mindset shift now that we should be moving towards a proactive response to cybersecurity rather than a reactive approach. So in the terms of cybersecurity, which is the cybersecurity practice that you would like to wish away if you had those special powers?
If you've ever gone to your banking website and made a new password, it will tell you, oh, you need a capital, you need a small, you need at least 8 characters, and then maybe some special characters as well. And I think that would be the one I would wish away, because it's still just 8 characters. It's something where we subconsciously might apply a pattern to, because 8 random characters are bad to remember. And it's really, everyone has the idea that that should be your password and it needs to be changed every 3 months to make sure really no one remembers it. Today saw 83% of all breached passwords are not breached, are following these things, and password reuse and social engineering are much more of a threat. So I would wish away that these minimum password requirements go away, and that people either use multi-factor or go with these kind of silly nursery rhyme advisors where you put like 6-7 words together, which are impossible to remember and which hopefully don't come directly from a nursery rhyme.
And then, of course, there is password safes and etc. But then even some of those have got hacked. I noticed recently LastPass got hacked again. Where do you stand on things like that?
Normally, if you use the password safe to generate your password, you're probably a lot safer than someone who's just coming up with them and writing them down in a notebook.
Yeah.
At the same time, it gives you an additional attack vector, especially if you, like in the case of LastPass, sync it to the cloud, have then a very easy to remember master password, or if your cloud service gets hacked and all the password stores get get copied. In that case, someone now has unlimited tries to find out your password, and if you're really a target, then they'll do so.
And we have been promised a passwordless future for as long as I can remember. I started this podcast in 2015, and then we had Fido on the podcast talking about how they were looking at eliminating the password. So I'm curious, here in 2023, how do you see this happening? And do you think that password management, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication are stepping stones to that tech utopia? And do you think we'll get there?
I think the big problem is that it's so ingrained into us that something that's safe needs us to enter a password versus something that's safe requires us to plug something into the computer or wait for the SMS. And really, if you think of multi-factor, SMS is the most common one. And I can go now on any big online shopping place and for $9 buy a piece of hardware which captures all the SMS going around in my vicinity. So I'm not sure whether they are good stepping stones yet. Single sign-on the other hand, it's good for companies, but not just from a security perspective, more than that from a perspective of employee engagement and employee frustration. Because 39% of employees don't want to sign in twice and actively avoid tasks where they have to sign in. So it's kind of a productivity tool more so than a cybersecurity tool. Because the downside with single sign-on is if you use a 4-digit password, that password gets you into everything without anyone having to enter it twice. But I think if you combine it with good practices with hardware-based authentication, and you mentioned FIDO, which might be a stepstone, especially if we use the chips in the computer for consumer accounts, that might give us a stepstone to a passwordless future. Whether or not it will work will depend on how people use it and also what else is required. Whether I need a latest generation smartphone, which might cut out half the world from passwordless future, or whether I need to invest in a YubiKey, which admittedly, if I give it to my 6-year-old, it would be gone in a week. So it's really not a good solution to a really bad problem. And maybe we'll have to see where the future takes us. And maybe we get multiple approaches to replacing passwords with different technologies, depending on what the needs are and who is accessing the computer.
And what about yourselves at Univention? What's your big focus right now? And is there anything you can share about what you're working on and what we can expect from Univention in the future too?
Well, the big point for us is still cloud service integration, especially now where people are thinking more about a recession, and in IT that means not only cut back on costs, cut back on money, which implies that cloud services are, instead of the hype, now get the same business treatment which software and hardware normally gets. So we see more integration, more requirement to support hybrid scenarios and to support both provisioning, which means getting the user account from your on-premise or your cloud solution into all the systems, and especially single sign-on across all the systems, because we want to save money, and the 5 minutes for login in a 500 user company can really add up over a year.
And there is at the moment, I think there's a huge pressure on every leader and every individual really to be in a state of almost continuous learning. So I've got to ask, as someone that's working in this fast-paced or this very fast-paced moving world, how or where do you self-educate and keep up to speed on the latest trends, etc.?
Naturally depends on which trend we're looking at. I found it very helpful to actually go to C-level talks, board-level webinars, board-level in-person meetings, and hear from people who are older, who are kind of transitioning even out of the industry, what they expect to be and where they see it. But that's my C-level person talking from, okay, I'll need to manage it for the tech stuff conferences, and thank God we're back in person, which normally gives you like the brief 20-minute talk overview of technological advances, threat environment, and these kind of things, compared to any kind of longer course, which might help later on to dive deeper into it, but which really needs you to know, okay, is it something I need to learn, or is it really a programming technique where thankfully there are people working for me who deal with how to program it in the most efficient way.
Well, I also like to have a little bit of fun with my guests at the end of every episode. So a question I'm going to ask you now is there a book that has inspired you, or that we could add to our Amazon wish list, or maybe a song that has inspired you or means something to you that we can add to our Spotify playlist? All I ask is, what are you going to leave us with today and why?
Given we've talked so much about IT,
yeah,
one of my absolute favorite books has nothing to do with IT, but a lot with building character and really going through an interesting life of twists and turns. And my really favorite book is Edmund Morris' biography on Theodore Roosevelt, The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt. Really, because it has all these kind of twists and turns down to things which are so painful for him, they're not in his autobiography, like his father or his first wife, but which really shaped him and which really gives you an insight on what actually shapes someone who goes through a very complex and very intricate and very interesting life. And so that's definitely the book I would recommend, and I'm normally recommending to anyone asking me that question.
Awesome. Well, I'll get that book added to our Amazon wish list for anyone listening to check out. And for anyone listening wanting to find out more about Univention, how you provide standardized identity management systems, I think from organizations of 5 people to 5 million, you do so much there. So anyone wanting to find out more about what you do or contact you or your team, what's the best starting point for all things Univention?
I think my LinkedIn profile, Kevin Dominic Korte, is certainly the best way to get in touch with me and to see me. Otherwise, if you want to go to our website, univention.com, the best place there is normally the reference list, because it gives you an idea, okay, what crazy things people did with our product and what normal things some others did.
I love that. I'll be checking that out myself. And we covered a lot there in a short amount of time, from things like digital identities, cybersecurity, password management, and other the features that we all use on a daily basis, or should be, from single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, etc. But and also just learning more about how companies can adopt leading-edge cybersecurity practices and hopefully turn IT from a hindrance into an asset, and those business enablers that we were talking about earlier. But more than anything, Kevin, just thank you for sharing your story with me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So a big thank you to Kevin for coming on the podcast today. And I think all the things we talked about today, such as digital identities, open source identity management systems, password management, multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, each one of those areas, really, we could have spoke about at length in an episode on their own. So I'm conscious that we did only briefly touch on each of those areas, but I wanted Kevin to come on here and offer an overview of what he's seeing out there, what changes he's witnessing, and how they're helping businesses. And then also put the microphone over to each and every one of you listening. Is there anything you'd like to comment on? What are you seeing in your workplace around things like multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, identity management, etc.? And if you can share them with me, I'd gladly, if you want to share them with me, you can either hold down the audio message button on Twitter or LinkedIn, just at Neil C. Hughes. I'll play it on a future episode. Or equally, just send me an email with your thoughts. Or if you want to come on the podcast, ask a question. techblogwriter@outlook.com. Please, I encourage each and every one of you to send me a little message, because I know you've all got incredible insights around this. So a big thank you for listening. As always, let me know some of the best practices you're seeing that will take IT from being a hindrance into an asset and a business enabler. And join me again tomorrow, where we'll tackle a completely different topic. But thanks for listening today. And until next time, don't be a stranger.